In my 10 years as program director for the New York Open Center, I never heard a talk that was too short, or a Q&A that was too long. So mindful of that, I want to leave lots of time for questions this talk may well inspire. And as you might readily imagine, a speaker who not only wrote a book entitled The Illusion of Will, Self, and Time, but actually believes that, questions abound. Some of the screen images will therefore fly by at reckless speed, but all of them can be later reviewed if you want on the YouTube recording. If it's not obvious why I felt the topic of God as a circle is worth exploring with this church, it surely would have been to the great psychedelic explorer Terence Mckenna, who, when he walked into San Francisco's Grace Cathedral under the influence of LSD, had a religious epiphany, realizing they'd gotten it all wrong. It was the rose window that was God. For the next 25 minutes, I want to corroborate that epiphany, guided by the much-cited title phrase, God is a circle, whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. Much cited, though of uncertain origin. It has, sometimes with the substitution of sphere for circle, been attributed to many sources east and west, including Hermes Trismegistus, Empedocles, an anonymous 12th century philosopher, and quoted by many more, including the uber, though ex-Unitarian himself, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who quotes it in his essay Circles, attributing it to St. Augustine. That attribution is false, profoundly false, since Augustine, brilliant thinker though he was the opposite of a circle guy. One might even call him the father of linearity. And we will have more to say about that. But for now, don't let that halo fool you. More importantly, though, than the phrase's origin, is the phrase's meaning. I do believe the most authentic first response to hearing God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere is, huh? And since we actually don't know who originated this phrase, I have taken the liberty of making a second response that instantly, I believe, renders the quote more intelligible. God is a circle whose center is everywhere and circumference is no identifiable somewhere. With this revision, we still preserve the ultimate unknowableness of whatever it is we conceive or imagine as God, but discard the impossible notion of a circle without a circumference. Of course, we still keep what many might more immediately object to, the radical reductionism, if not absurdity, of defining God in terms of a geometrical shape. Especially those in the Judeo-Christian tradition who conceive of God as far more dynamic than this ultimate abstraction seems to allow. My necessarily quick response to that objection has been around for several millennia. The ancient Rig Veda, far anticipating the Judeo-Christian assumption of a creator God initiating a world from darkness by darkness hidden, asked these questions. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Whence was it produced? Whence is this creation? Questions that have yet, I submit, to get a slam dunk answer. A circle God, of course, assumes no such creative start, or any start at all for that matter, cohering rather with the non-dual, unborn beginningless God of the Upanishads. For a center point and circumference are mutually defining. Indeed, the only way to know one is to know the other, which makes it an intriguing version of the great saying of the Upanishads, Tattvamasi, that thou art. This ultimate statement of the relationship between the absolute and the individual is the foundation of the preeminent non-dual doctrine, Advaita, of Adi Shankara, and is frequently depicted as a circle. And in our consideration of Tat Famasi as the nature of God or the Absolute, whose shape we are here proposing, we don't need to abandon the Western tradition. As William James pointed out, introducing Tat Famasi into his classic and still widely read text, The Varieties of Religious Experience, this overcoming of all the usual barriers between the individual and the Absolute is the great mystic achievement. In mystic states, we both become one with the Absolute, and we become aware of our oneness. This, James said, is the everlasting and triumphant mystical tradition, hardly altered by differences of clime or creed. In Hinduism, in Neoplatonism, in Sufism, in Christian mysticism, in Whitmanism, we find the same recurring note, perpetually telling of the unity of man with God. James could well have also included his godfather, Emerson, whose non-dual belief, the seer and the seen are one, he also identified with the Tat Famasi god Brahman in his poem of that name. They reckon ill who leave me out. When me they fly, I am the wings. I am the doubter and the doubt, and I the hymn the Brahman sings. And another prominent Western-based endorsement of this same non-dual divinity was given by Michael Talbot in the conclusion of his now classic text, The Holographic Universe. Out there is only the indivisible totality, Brahman. The radical non-dual unity of subject and object, and all manifestation as single-sourced in God, gives, I believe, the most plausible, if not compelling support for consideration of God the circle. All points on the circumference only existing as such in relation to the center point, and the center point only existing in relation to every point on the circumference. Of course, this divine circularization can never be more than a conceptual ordering of an ultimately unperceivable, unobjectifiable whole, for, in agreement with the great 20th century theologian Paul Tillich, God is not a being, but being itself. Consistent with God the circle, Tillich goes on to say that the ultimate concept of God must embrace all being. Otherwise, we are left with a relative God, like Zeus, who was subservient to fate. But again, we do not need to leave our Western heritage behind to encounter versions of such an all-embracing, non-dual, non-relative God or absolute, especially conceivable as circular. The 6th century BCE Greek philosopher Xenophanes, for one, had already identified as the greatest amongst all gods, not at all like mortals in body or in thought, of whom, in keeping with a non-subservient being, it can be said, whole he sees, whole he thinks, and whole he hears. This greatest amongst gods fits God the circle, with a fixed center point defining the circumferal whole. For as Xenophanes goes on to elaborate, always he abides in the same place, not moving at all, nor is it seemly for him to travel to different places at different times. God the circle, of course, would not need to travel to different places, because those circumferal places and the center point mutually define and establish each other. And the Greeks, including the pre-Socratics, Plato, the Neoplatonists, and the Eastern Orthodox Church Fathers, readily conceived of divinity as circular. Pythagoras not only held that the most beautiful figure is the sphere among solids and the circle among plane figures, he drew attention to the special sacred quality of the leaves of the mallow plant. Though no one knows why for sure, his biographer, Iamblichus, tells us that the mallow plant, for Pythagoras, is the first sign of the sympathy between heavenly and earthly beings. And if that is not enough to qualify its round shape, radiating out from a center point as divine symbolism, a mutually sympathetic, indeed defining relationship between a center point and its circumference. We know that the circle dot, representing the monad, a Greek word meaning solitary unit, was conceived by the Pythagoreans and later Greeks as the absolute or prime metaphysical being. And Parmenides, Father Parmenides to Plato, and the only philosopher he called deep, bathos, not only conceived of ultimate reality, what is, as complete on every side, like a well-rounded sphere, from a center point equally matched everywhere, but also in anticipation of Einstein's spherical block universe, utterly unchanging. And of course there is Plotinus's center-pointed radiating one, not to be confused with his conception of God, although eventually it was, but originally a far more abstract concept of an all-embracing unity, in which what the center is like is revealed through the radii as if it were unfolded without having been unfolded. With this rich circular heritage, it is no wonder that the 6th century Greek Christian saint Dorotheus of Gaza would import God the circle into his newly forming post-pagan religion, with God being the center point of a circumference, though a circumference whose radii he did not fully identify as also God, but rather as the paths of human lives. Early Greek Orthodox Christian theology had perhaps neither retained enough of its non-dual Greek ancestry, nor yet absorbed enough of non-dual Christian mysticism to consider God the center point and circumference as dual aspects of one unity. Circles, of course, have been the most commonly employed spiritual symbols, East and West, for millennia, traditional or esoteric. William James, I believe, gives one of the best examples of why that may be with his own circle offering. Not a rose window, but its structural facsimile. The windrose on a compass. And I will use it as a compass to help guide us toward a clearer understanding of circularity as divinity. Like the windrose on a compass, James asks, may not we form the margin of some more really central self in things which is co-conscious with the whole of us? May not you and I be confluent in a higher consciousness, though we know it not? Conceived as such, any continuity, let alone causality, between adjacent points on the margin, aka circumference, are derived solely from the relation to the shared center point, not from a direct line between the points themselves, for there are no straight lines anywhere on a circle, no matter how infinitesimal. You can draw a straight line through a circle, but not through two immediately adjacent points on it. A straight line restricted to the circle's circumference can connect with one point only, before veering off in a tangent. Every moment takes place on a circumference, but since the size of the circumference is unknowable, we can never know what might be coming next, based on what has come before. Although we seem always to move forward in time, just as we most often do in space, how often does what seems will be the inevitable next moment turn out differently than we anticipated, or suddenly involve many more steps than anticipated before it does happen? In the latter case, the circumference that no identifiable somewhere was larger than we had imagined. Likewise, when a goal is reached with fewer steps than anticipated, the circumference is smaller. But although we do not know the size of the circumference, we can feel ourselves on it, rather than drifting away on a tangent, whenever we realize that the relation between one moment and the next is not accessed by a straight line between them, but by their mutual relation to one center point. This feeling of center point sourcing arises whenever we experience what spiritual adepts and meditators know as the gap between thoughts. As Krishnamurti put it, though the response, the movement of thought, seem so swift. There are gaps. There are intervals between thoughts. Between two thoughts, there is a period of silence which is not related to the thought process. Just as light, we know since Einstein, does not consist of a continuous stream, but rather is a succession of indivisible whole units or quanta of energy, so does its sibling, consciousness, actually pulse in a series of gap-filled whole moments, including whatever apparent object it is conscious of. As the great neuropsychological researcher and theorist Jason Brown put it, in order for an object to exist as a solid, it must recur over successive durations. This is true for all perceptions, though it is more emphatic in some modalities than others. It may not be obvious that a tree, like any visual object, must be perceived over a succession of occasions for it to be perceived at all. The ongoing gap in consciousness, always there to be accessed as a gap between thoughts, is a sourcing of fundamental depth that drops one down, as if through a trap door, from the seemingly seamless surface of linear time. As Brown so elegantly puts it, oneness is not the coming together of God and mystic, but the reaching down to the foundations of thought before the surfacing of individuality. We could say that to the degree that the surfacing of individuality is felt to be on a linear path, we are treading a tangent line, disconnected from the foundation of thought. To imagine further what it might be like to take more than a few steps, not as we are accustomed, as individuated selves, forging a linear path in an indifferent object universe, consider one of Emerson's greatest disciples, Walt Whitman, who says, "Each moment and whatever happens thrills me with joy. One and all are to me miracles, the whole referring, yet each distinct and in its place. To me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle." Becoming identified with the source of moments, reaching down to the foundations of thought before the surfacing of individuality, Whitman loses the sense of surface agency without losing the sense of the surface itself. The whole referring, yet each distinct and in its place, is repeatedly emphasized by Whitman. The universe is duly in order. Everything is in its place. What has arrived is in its place, and what waits shall be in its place. Everything can be said to be in its place only if everything participates in an orderly whole, whose configuration is in no danger of being altered by its parts. No independent causal agency, no even independent selves. The simple, compact, well-joined scheme. Myself disintegrated, everyone disintegrated, yet part of the scheme. This disintegration into a compact, well-joined scheme fits James Windrow's well, and even more so when combined with James's somewhat reluctant acknowledgement of just how duly ordered his divine Windrows might be in relation to what has arrived and what shall be. At the end of his life, responding to the compelling evidence for precognition, James asked, "Is consciousness already there, waiting to be uncovered? And is it a veridical revelation of reality?" This question, of course, bears directly on the consideration of God the circle, a circle without beginning or end. But given the pressure of illusory time in this talk, I can only give you a 1-minute image-only trailer of the kind of affirmative evidence that James was open to considering, and directly beseeched later generations to do the same. All of which are presented and commented on in my soon-to-be YouTube talk on Second Sight. The massive compelling evidence for both retrocognition and precognition, when combined with a Parmenidean Einsteinian block universe, a block universe very much in play among physicists, though not a rectangular block, but a circle, as both Einstein and Parmenides conceived it, as if the universe were indeed a cosmic mandala, the Sanskrit word for circle, compel us to consider, with James, that consciousness is indeed already there, waiting to be uncovered, and that, therefore, the confluently active radii of his windrows become confluently activated radial endpoints, serialized in place prior to activation. The one consciousness, already there, waiting to be uncovered, is divided functionally into the knowing and the known, with the knowing, center point, eternally activating the known circumference, as in the well-known 5 phenomenon, mostly now known as a symbol of frustration. Eternally activating because there is no unactivated catatonic universe, as the word block suggests. There is no movement without the backdrop of stillness, nor stillness without the backdrop of movement. Movement and stillness are codependent terms. As James's student and colleague Santayana duly noted, even if the realm of truth is indeed eternal and static, there must be something akin to an exploring spirit that may traverse it without adding, removing, or changing a single feature of that indestructible labyrinth. A recurring circular path, a path well suited for an internalistic block universe, and best suited for a circular one, has been acknowledged east and west for millennia. If one may believe the Pythagoreans, said Eudemus, considered the first historian of science, the same things will recur exactly. And I shall be holding my pointer and talking to you as you sit there, and everything else will be exactly as it is now. Another titan of Western philosophy, Nietzsche, joined Pythagoras in endorsing eternal recurrence. But there is a formidable obstacle to its re-embrace. St. Augustine, being only the most prominent church father to resist what he called, quote, those arguments with which the ungodly try to turn our simple piety from the straight road, and to make us join them in walking in circles. God forbid, I say, that we should swallow such nonsense. Christ died once and for all for our sins, and in rising from the dead, he is never to die again. He is no longer under the sway of death. But this is more pleading than reasoning, as it was with the other anti-recurrence church fathers before him. There is simply no cogent reason for banning the crucifixion from eternal recurrence, and thereby herding all of us into a linear path to salvation. After all, the Celtic cross may well reflect the fundamental Celtic myth, according to which time does indeed progress in a cyclical manner, so that events recur in an identical form exactly as they did the first time. But of course Augustine was hardly alone in his rejection of circularity. Judaism emphasized, if not introduced, linearity with Abraham went forth. As Thomas Cahill explains, for the Jews, history is always something new. The future will not be what has happened before. However inconvenient Ecclesiastes 1:9 is to that belief. The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there is no new thing under the sun. But perhaps belief in divine circularity is re-emerging, not a moment too soon. According to Jung, UFOs may be a projection of a psychic content of wholeness that has at all times been symbolized by the circle, and therefore an attempt by the unconscious collective psyche to heal the split in our apocalyptic age by means of the symbol of the circle. And finally, this. Just before COVID came to town, the Guggenheim Museum had its best attended show ever, the channeled art of Hilma af Klint. Painted by her in the first 2 decades of the last century, she says her hand was guided by a higher spirit, who informed her that her work was to be shown in a temple, though what that temple would be was not indicated, other than it would be a, quote, circular building where viewers would ascend a spiral path towards the sky. When this vision, recorded decades before the museum came into existence, even as an idea, was shared with the audience of the symposium held on the opening of the exhibition, an audible gasp was heard throughout the Guggenheim Auditorium. And, as frequently attends revelations of nonlinear time, perhaps even a few, "Oh my God." Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, does anyone, the plan was to have a question and answer time. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, this is Bonnie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi. So my thoughts on this is I'm wondering how this all relates to fate then,
Mm-hmm.
and what changes humans may have on their own fate or on the fate of the universe as a whole, so to speak.
That's a great question.
You know, this sounds very much like there have been a lot of religions who believe that there's a plan that was set down and there is no such thing as changing. Now, we have many people who are attempting to change things as we speak, many things, things regarding climate crisis, things regarding politics, etc., around the world, not just here in the United States, obviously.
Right.
So how does that play out in this idea of precognition,
Right.
and this circle idea of everything in its place, so to speak?
No, that's a great question, Bonnie. Thanks a lot. It's funny, I've been answering this question on Quora for like the last 8 months. I guess when anybody has a fate question, they're looking for me now. You know, so if you actually put my name in fate, you'd see all different answers as the question's asked. I mean, the thing about religions and fate is interesting. I mean, if you take, for instance, I mean, how many, Christianity, the Jesuits, I mean, how many, like they look at themselves as different than, say, some of the Hindu people they thought who were just letting people lie around in poverty, and but they come and build their hospitals. That's their narrative about this, and there's things to do, but if you think about it, Christianity itself is based on prophecy, right? Jesus was like on a timetable. He knew things had to happen and were going to happen at certain times. When he says to Peter, before the cock crows, thou will deny me thrice, a specific amount of times, a specific time frame, I don't think he was guessing. So, and in fact, we even have, the reason we have cut pages now, right? Instead of the rolled scrolls, was so you could check the prophecies in the Old Testament against the fulfillments in the New Testament. I actually think, and Tibetans, they have their Nichiren, their state oracle, who the Dalai Lama said, everything he told me was true. It came out just as it is. Ramakrishna was that, his leading disciple, when asked, how do you know he's the real deal, said, everything he predicted came true. Prophecy. So, in one hand, it seems to me that the ability, the capacity, and just the awareness that one can access the future is a real door through one enters a spiritual understanding and temple. Now, as far as, it's like the question always comes up, well, gee, if there's no free will, and it's all fate, why get out of bed? And I say, well, try that. Just go lie in bed. And my daughter just ran that by me. She says, okay, go lie in bed, see what happens. Say, okay, there's nothing to do. It's all fated. Well, what's going to happen? The phone will ring, your bladder will, press on you, whatever, and you'll get up, you'll smell some coffee, things will happen. So we're all where we are in this world with this understanding. And I'm telling you, for me, it's a real negotiation. My overall sense is, to put it in one line is, we're the center of a narrative gravity. Each of us is different. We're all the centers of a narrative gravity, but we're not the authors of the center. The author is that center point. And so, somebody, fighting for climate change and this and that, I don't see why, whether it's fated or not fated, would drop them out of that. Because if they say, hey, it's all done anyway, so it's all done anyway. So where does that leave you? What are you just going to sit idle? Go sit idle for an afternoon. Then what? I mean, it's not like there's any shortage of desires and stuff. It's just that when one thinks of something as vast as God and spirituality, I think it's actually very comforting to know that ultimately everything is, as Whitman says, everything is duly in order. What has arrived is in its place, and what will come is in its place. I find that a very positive, healing message. And as everyone who knows Whitman knows, he got around. Actually, he spent more time in the study reading books, we now know, than he liked to represent. But he was a very dynamic guy. It's not like you have to lose your dynamic urges and stuff, but ultimately there's a kind of peace that holds you no matter what. There's a saying I heard one guru say, treat every moment as if it comes as if there's free will, and every moment as it passes as if there isn't. Maybe, but just to finish up here, the sine qua non to me, the without which nothing of spirituality is peace, is really abiding peace. And I don't know any understanding more than really feeling oneself as part of a circle that brings not only peace, but a sense of unity with everyone.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? I mean, I could say something. I mean, it just came to me because Jonathan and I go back and forth all the time. I'm not convinced of the inevitable, this inevitable timeline. But at the same time, I talk to him a lot. I don't know if I feel like there's, I might be diverting us somewhere, but whatever. We can always, no one was speaking, so we can always go back. But I'm more convinced of this idea of parallel timelines. The multiverse. If there's different. There's the timeline where your daughter lays down in bed, and like you said, oh, try not getting out of bed. And there's a timeline where she's like, she's like, no, I'm not going to do it. And both of those are playing out somewhere. So anyhow, I wanted to throw that out there. And
look, Dave, the multiverse is also huge among physicists. I find it absolutely crazy. I mean, not what you just said, maybe one other, but their idea that at every moment there's like an infinite amount of other things that are happening. And this is what they need to do to avoid the full implications, what other physicists say are the full implications of relativity and the block universe. Because there's a lot of physicists to say, look, the evidence is there, it is space-time and all of this. So, but they come up with this multiverse, and you could go for that. I just find it absolutely loopy, but not what you just said, but just it would tie in though somewhat with their theory. They would like it. I don't understand. I don't get it. It just doesn't work for me.
I know you're probably really hot, Jonathan. I think you turned your AC back on, but or was that you? Maybe that was someone else. But because we got a little bit of feedback, but I don't
Is that all right? Can you not hear me if I do that?
no, I mean, I guess it's good. We gotta, you're probably hot. You've been suffering in the heat, maybe give you a break. But anyone else have oh, Sally has a question. Go ahead, Sally. You're muted. You're muted.
Thank you for letting me know. So, you know, a lot of what the different philosophies and the you know, the perspectives are so human centered, or, you know, our species centered, you know, the examples and everything else, when we've actually been on this particular planet for a very tiny fraction of time. And it's kind of interesting that the way we have to explain things is in terms of our own civilization, which is just an instant. You know, so when we're talking about God or something like that, I have always thought that it was a human creation, that, you know, that we have so many multiplicity of ways of explaining the unexplainable, and it's very wondrous to understand all of them, but it's very human centered. So I wanted to get your perspective on the fact that all of this is, you know, really just even in, you know, humans have been around for thousands and thousands of years, but the philosophers and the religions and the texts of, you know, much even smaller time. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks. I have this phrase now I call divinophobes. You know, not people who fear God or are afraid or don't want anything to do with God, but people who avoid like phenomena that just transcends our ordinary everyday understanding of the way the world evolved or what we know from the material. Because, you know, many scientists, and the material scientists are in the ascendancy, they want you to think that consciousness comes out of matter, that first there was matter and rocks and chemicals, whatever, that somehow consciousness emerged from that. So it's like a dead universe theory. But there are so many experiences that cut into that and suggest otherwise. I mean, you know, it was James's colleague Royce said, you know, the fact of an object out there is the fixed determination to have it so. And, you know, what seems so solid to us and what seems like objects that make us subjects are really mostly space. You know, if you have a table that's smooth, right? You go with your spectrograph and go into it a little deeper. It's woody fiber. It's a wilderness of woody fiber. You go deeper and it's a bunch of molecules moving around, you know, mostly being space. As Eddington said, you could put your hand through it at some point. It's just a coincidence that you can. But if you put that space and that woody fiber and that smooth hardness together, you have a monstrous medley. You don't, what object is this that we think we emerge from? So, oh, great. Battery running low, as if there weren't enough. Let's see, okay. Hopefully I took care of that. So if to the focus, take it away from God and really put it on some of these psychic phenomena. You know, James called, and the reason I think why James is still so vital today, he's quoted all the time at Tucson conferences and stuff, but he was so open to this. He was the founder of the American Society of Psychical Research. You know, when he said, you know, psychical research is a dog with so few friends at court, any stick is good enough to shake at it. But he says, you know, you look at it with an open mind and it transforms this dead universe theory where we just emerged out of. Now I know that can seem itself very morphic. Oh, well, we're kind of special. And I'm not saying these bodied animals are saying, but I am saying consciousness may be a lot more special than we realize. When I think of some of the really great Ramana Maharshi and some of these other great gurus, they share, and a lot of the Tibetans, they share the belief that, you know, the waking reality is itself a kind of illusion. and that our waking reality is itself really a dream that's single source somewhere. And psychical research lends support to that. So really all I have to say is, are we working with a dead universe model when we shut out psychical research? And why would we want to, given these incredible, spiritual attainers, who almost all of them, especially the ones in India, get their bonus fides from what we would call psychical phenomena.
Well, Jonathan, just following up on that, it doesn't mean that the universe is dead or anything like that. I'm just saying the prioritization of the human perspective as opposed to something that is just more looking, and I believe you have a very scientific, from the things you believe that DNA, the DNA analysis will absolutely tell where your ancestors came from. It's not a psychic thing, it's actually a test that was run. I mean, it sounds like you have a very foundational belief in scientific knowledge, but that seems to be, that's sort of, to me, a little counter to this idea of, everything is in our heads. Because it's, I guess I come from feeling like that we're just part of something much bigger. We're not the be all and end all. All of our psychic powers are amazing, but they're not the supreme way of looking at things. I mean, that's just, I guess if you get to know insects, or you get to know rocks, or you get to know anything, like you see that they're not dead. It's not a dead universe. It's a very alive universe. But that's just my, I think this is a wonderful conversation and I really appreciate it. But
Hi,
it's just,
Sally.
it's making us have to think.
Hi, Sally. Hello, Jonathan. May I interject? Probably try to bridge between your discourses. Maybe Jonathan is focusing on sentience as such, like maybe it's like more Kantian, like Immanuel Kant's approach, that he was discussing what the possibilities of perception are for all rational beings. Rational beings can be any kind of creature, including human beings, animals, or God. So we can experience the world as rational beings. I'm wondering that in this discourse that takes place between those who are more atheist and those who are more theists, whether there's some agnostic middle, because I had taken that route before. I did not think that I could prove decisively that God does not exist. So I was agnostic for a period of time in my life before I became more theistic, pantheistic, as I am today. Does that help, though, when I talk about rationality and sentience that can be found in different creatures, no matter what? It doesn't have to be anthropocentric.
Right. No, I find it very helpful. Somewhere James says that, maybe there's just, when he says there's one anima mundi breathing in all of us. The thing is, I'm going to go back to the dream thing. In a dream, you're all of these people. You're all of the hard things taste. I have dreams. I'm sort of losing my sense of taste. It's not COVID. It's been going on for a while. But in a dream, I have a very heightened sense of taste and a heightened sense of smell, and things have real weight, and and then there's all of these other people and all of this, right? There's this entire world that's as real to me, every bit as real. In fact, even a little more, sense oriented than this world. And then I wake up. So the question, and it is a question of sentience, it arises, is it not possible that all of us are like the dream of Brahman. I mean, and the thing is, wouldn't that be a kind of cool thing? I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing? Why not walk around? If I see you, Jennifer, when you're on the screen, but if I saw you as if we were sharing, you know, a common thought. Isn't that what love is? I mean, when you look in somebody's eyes, it's like, whoa, suddenly we're not two. It's like one consciousness, one sentientness is coming through. You know, Rumi makes a big deal of this with gazing and everything else. But so I actually find it appealing, this notion, that notion that, and it's a notion for those who like Yogananda, Paramanta, his guru's guru, Yukteswar, the guy on the Beatles album, right, the Sgt. Pepper's, his guru, Lahiri Mahasa, he said, it's all a dream. And Ramana Maharshi said the same thing. The Tibetans say the same thing. But we dismiss that because we feel, well, come on, there's stuff, there's DNA, there's matter, there's all of this, but all that's in a dream too. So I don't know. I just say yes to sentience in the widest sense possible, and yes to the possibility that we're all part of one dream as a beautiful vision that could heal the world.
I suggest checking out the Diamond Sutra.
Ah, yes. Share
Yeah.
that. Do you want to share a little bit of that?
Oh, well, it's just, I read it some time ago, actually about 3 years ago, and it was just this same notion that you were discussing about the fact that we potentially exist in a shared dream. Like this phenomenal realm is an illusion to us, and that is what they discuss in the Diamond Sutra.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, I have slides on this too about, I mean, in fact, the Tibetans are so sure of this, you know, because they do a lot of lucid dreaming, right? And they're really good at that. And unlike most people who do lucid dreaming, you know, they just satisfy every desire they can, right? And there's even a state called ahedonia, like apolitical, no pleasure. You've exhausted everything. But the Tibetans use it for to better themselves, right? So they'll have a lucid dream. They'll see they're in a lucid dream and they see a wall. They know they're dreaming. So they walk through the wall, or they try to, but they bump their head. Why? Because they're so conditioned to thinking that, you know, in their waking so-called reality, everything is really hard, even though we know it isn't. So what they actually do in their lucid dreams is they turn around and they back up through the wall as a way of overcoming that false sense that reality is really all about hard, soft subjects meeting hard objects. You know, they really, really play with this at a very deep level.
That's awesome. I was just thinking the last time I moderated one of these, I took a consensus. There was a consensus to end at 12, but we stay, whoever wants to stay stays. So does that sound good? This way, if people were planning on jetting away somewhere at 12, they can sign off, and then we can continue this discussion, which I'm up for. All right, I'll just do it. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, for the great conversation. Please stay for more if you'd like. And if you want to unmute and join me in the chalice extinguishing words, feel free. Otherwise, I'll just say it. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we keep in our hearts until we're together again. So yeah, thank you. If be a great time to, I mean, feel free to jump off at any point. You don't have to say goodbye, or if you want to say goodbye, that's cool. But yeah, goodbye, everyone that's saying bye.
Thank you so much, Dave and Jonathan. I've got a lot of chores I gotta do today.
Of course.
So I gotta go, but thanks so much.
Take great care.
All right, I didn't mean to interject too much. I'll continue.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Service.
I'm going to be opening the Diamond Sutra as soon as I get off.
Wonderful. So will I soon. Take care.
Take care, Jennifer. I mean, maybe I'll just continue. I'll be the one to continue what what you said, John, unless Lewis is unmuting to say goodbye.
So,
Long Lewis. Oh,
been a great relaxing weekend. This weekend's been relaxing, so your service really helped me mentally just now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Lewis.
thanks. So yeah, I was gonna say the conversation just now about passing through the wall. I'm reading this great book, Enlightened Vagabond, about Patrul Rinpoche, a Tibetan Buddhist wandering monk. And in that book, and I'm 99% sure it was in that book. Sometimes I'm reading three things at once and I misplace. But there's this great scene where there's this. There were three really supposedly enlightened guys around that time, and I forget the guy's name, but he, the story is told about a contemporary of Rinpoche who some younger monk comes and he wants to challenge him, in his, in his understanding of the way, the Dharma, whatever. So this young monk says, "I want to challenge you," and the older monk says, "Okay, what would you like? What should we talk about?" And the young monk says, "All right, this pillar right here. Let's start our discussion on that." So apparently the older monk just passes his hand through the pillar, and then the younger monk, of course, gets on his hands and knees and says, "Will you teach me? I want to be a disciple." Instead of challenging him, he's just like, "All right, I guess you win this argument." So, and I know that's maybe sounds like a tall tale to some people, but I think it's a good story.
I had a Taoist teacher from China, spoke almost no English. When I told her the thing about Eddington, who talks about this, about it's just, a coincidence that you can't put your hand through a board because at any moment it's space. She said, yeah, she knows monks who can do that, just put their hand through. Robert Monroe, Journeys, the Far Journeys, the out-of-body guy, he talked about it one morning, he put his hand through the floor. So it's like, add these things up, and I kind of like to follow the guys who look like they have the most serenity, to tell you the truth, like Ramana Maharshi. I know many people at the Open Health Center would have pictures of him around and stuff, and he literally, like the Tibetans, believes this is a dream, and I think there's a lot of positive things to consider with that, because of the unity for all of us being dream. I think there's a lot. I mean, nobody wants to investigate into Western culture because we're very dualistic. But Emerson said he broke through with non-duality. The seeing and the things seen are the same, right? I mean, it's not like we don't have a tradition to work with this, but I get it. We are who we are. But anyway, I'm pro-dream. That's all.
Hello, this is Bonnie again. I think that what you're saying is very comforting in a way. You're absolutely right. But I think I personally, and this is obviously a personal thing, we're all based upon our experiences from the past. I have difficulty accepting. It feels very finite. It feels very finite. And in some cases, this dream is a nightmare. And maybe if everyone would just accept that we're unified in a dream, then maybe the dream would become a dream and not a nightmare. But right now I feel very nightmarish. Believing that things are exactly as they should be, and that what will be is already planned, predetermined, is very difficult for me when I see so many people and the environment suffering, that I would like to see change. And that change may or may not come, but looking at it as a pre-planned existence is difficult in thinking that, well, whether or not that positive change comes or doesn't is already pre-planned. And, you know, thinking people want to know what the future is. They want to know what a goal is, and they want to see those goals met. So it's very difficult. It's just a very difficult.
It's not a popular belief. I totally agree. Although, having said that, it's like, and this is not you at all. I don't know you well or all, really, do I? But I do know a number of people who, you know, are fighting for climate change, or fighting for, you know, who the anger's there, and there's a degree you want to wonder, is that necessarily part of what needs to happen? I mean, it's one thing to feel compassion and pain and suffering for somebody, not cut yourself off that way. But it seems to me, you know, one of my key things I write in my book is anger is always a lesson. And to the degree you stay angry, you're not learning it. So is it not possible to have both? In other words, there's changes to be made based mostly on a loving, compassionate, empathetic response to things. And might those changes even increase if your heart is open and you're more aware of people suffering than if you barrel down there and, you know, really go at it like a fighter? I mean, it's a question. The other question, of course, is, you know, people love Whitman, right? Walt Whitman is, man, he's still the guy. He's survived well into the century and well he should. James was fascinated by him all his life. But you can't really have Whitman without some key fundamental understandings, like the universe is duly ordered, what has arrived is in its place, what shall come is in its place. You can't really have it both ways. You just have to say, okay, it's all ordered, but where does that leave me now? Oh, well, you know, I mean, you could try it out. I'm still trying it out. Look, I do Tai Chi, but mostly I'm a Jewish guy, like I said, 100% Ashkenazi, not even 99. Jews, we're in our shoulders, you know? I'm in my shoulders all the time. Tai Chi is about trying to get out of your shoulders. I'm not living. When I had my mystical experience, I did have a week of arriving in the exact arising moment with the gap between thoughts. I did get to experience this, which may or may not be what the Buddha's enlightenment was. I'm not saying, and I don't write much about it, but I do know what that experience is like, where you're just there, arriving in the exact moment with full kind of presence. And I wonder, you know, what is a belief system that most enhances that? The Greeks didn't even, you know, they didn't even walk forward. They don't even think we walked forward in time. To the Greeks, we walked backwards. That was their everyday way of looking in time. It's also a tribe in Bolivia they found that does the same, which is, of course, the way we actually do move in time, right? We don't know the next moment before it comes. And this would help one prepare to be what it is to walk on a circle, I have to say, too, because you can't, you know, again, there's no connecting points on a circle on the circumference. You can't draw a line between points. But walking backwards, because, right, you don't know the next moment until it passes in front of you, and then you can line it up with something that happened 20 years ago or 2 minutes ago. That's how, you know, that's actually how we are in time, but we've somehow turned around in a way that I don't think is very helpful, because we think we walk through time, we move through time like you move through space, but we don't. You don't know what the next moment's going to be. And to be open to all possibilities, you know, like the Stoics. Stoicism is very big now, and they say, when you kiss your child goodnight, say to yourself, this is a human child. It could die by the morning. I'm a father of 2 now grown-up women. I never wanted to say that. I never did say that, but I see the point of it, because you're locking out a possibility that really could be there. And maybe that's not the best way to live, by denying yourself realities.
I wonder how other sentient beings like whales, etc., any animal, play into this.
Yeah.
It would be very interesting to find out some way
Yeah.
how they are dealing with do whales, for example, have their own religion where they believe that they are part of a circle and that they're all connected? Is there a belief system? Same with plants. Plants interact all the time. Trees interact, moss interacts, fungus. What is that about? What is that philosophy? How does that join them? Because, you know, like Sally stated, we're talking about how humans interact, but there's so much more to the universe
Absolutely.
than humans.
Look at COVID, right? A virus is either the largest molecule or the smallest organism. You know, it's this weird thing. They don't know quite what it is. Look how much intelligence, and they seem to be working as a community, you know, getting around our vaccines. And, you know, I mean, and I think that's almost a message to the world, like, whoa, something that tiny having that much organized intelligence, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, flip around. Paul Stamets, by the way, you were talking about, like, you know, like he's the one who says, you know, it's like the internet, you know, mushrooms, right? He's the great fungi. There's a whole movie about him recently. He's a real big deal. He has one of the best precognitive experiences of anybody. You can go put Stamets, Joe Rogan, and he talks about it. And he says, it was so convincing, so compelling. I won't share it with you right now, but so compelling that he said, there is no linear time. There can't be. Because this happened to me, and he's the psilocybin guy. Psilocybin's called the divinatory mushroom, right? So I guess he's had enough experiences with this. Ayahuasca, the same thing. I mean, we have so much information now about seeing the actual future, but I don't see enough people really responding to that. Mostly they react against it. But I'm trying to find a way, and again, I'm not a Buddha. I'm not walking around like, hey, I'm enlightened, follow me. But I'm in my sort of Jewish bookish way. Everything goes. I'm really trying to marshal all the support for it. So when I do finally just wander in the woods or something, I'll have done my work, and then I'll, you know, whatever, try to live what I'm talking about, because I'm not really living it. You know, I feel tensions all the time. I feel just like everybody who's listened to this. Dave will tell you right before we started, it was like, this technical thing, that technical thing, you know. But I do believe, like the Buddha and others, they were with, like Whitman. I do believe Whitman, when he says that everything is duly ordered, is speaking for enlightened beings everywhere. I do believe that.
A lot to think about. Well, thank you very much. I am going to.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, Bonnie.
George.
I'll say hello. I got on board late, and so I'm been trying to catch up. And all I suppose I would maybe contribute at this point is that I think it's enlightening. I think it's relevant, the difference, you know, from between you know, the experience of the world as a totality, which is a oneness. It's almost like in science, cosmology, you know, there's a sense of understanding the world, the universe as a one, as a circle, which is all, you know, the way it should be, which is all duly ordered. But there's also, you know, the quantum field, and which is irrational and unpredictable and spontaneous, and so, you know, it just suggests to me that in the moment somehow we live in both universes. In the moment we're at one with the universe. We're at perfect peace. Everything's the way it should be. But also we have a freedom. We have a freedom to choose. We can exist and determine the next moment in a way that's profoundly contradictory. We can't. Physics has never been able yet to reconcile the cosmology with quantum. And I think that that's our personal experience too. We can live in the oneness of let's say of the rightness and the predictability and of our life and the fate and so on and so forth. But there's also the possibility of living in a moment in which what we do next is totally unpredictable and totally subject to choice and totally random, and it may not be our choice or our unpredictability. It may just be the unpredictability that's inherent in our life. And you know, it's you could put that in terms of left brain and right brain, but I think that profound duality can't really be reconciled. You know, we have responsibility for saving the world in this moment, but the world is perfectly fine without us in this moment. You know what I mean? And how do you you can't put those two together. You really have to live in the, I think we have to live in that tension between the fact that everything is perfect. You know, Tagore said that, famous quote for Tagore, you know, life is perfect. Life is perfect. That's just as it is. Life is perfect. It even has room for improvement. And that's the paradox, you know, and I think it's comforting that everything is the way it should be and everything is perfect and everything is incredibly wonderful. And if we could tune into the ecstasy of the moment, we would be totally blown apart. But on the other hand, we have a role to play, and it's can't be, you know what I mean? It's real, and we have a responsibility, and it's a fascinating thing. We have the best of both worlds if we can hold on. It's like holding on to two different poles of the battery. You know, if we can take the shock, you know, we can really move.
Yeah, no, that's great. I absolutely. I mean, there's never been a denial that there's a feeling of free will, right? I mean, it absolutely feels like we have choice. The physics thing, the quantum, you know, John Bell is good on this. John Stuart Bell, the famous physicist. The quantum thing about indeterminability is not the same as indeterminate. It's just we can't determine it. We don't know. It doesn't mean there's not what he calls super determinism. So I think that's just one important thing to say, that quantum did not suddenly make like, oh, there's indeterminacy in the universe. No, there's just our inability to measure what the next moment's going to be. That's different. I absolutely.
I think that's very debatable, though. But I'll let it go. Yeah, I think.
Super. You want to look up sorry, just look up the phrase super determinism, and you can. I have it in my book too about John Stuart Bell, and you know, a formidable guy with this, right? So much is around him. Yeah, I mean, you know, physicists don't always make the best philosophers, I have to say. So there's a little, but as you know, some like Schrodinger and all, you know, they say it's all one too. I mean, they're you know, they're sort of like the leading lights in some of the stuff. Einstein was very open to psychical research, right? As you know, many aren't. And some don't want anything to do with this idea of a block universe, space-time, even though, you know, there's plenty of reputable physicists who say, no, this is what the data show, even you can't. So I agree with that. But in terms of my own role and your own role, it's like we're actors, you know, it's like Shakespeare said, right? We're merely players. I was an actor as a kid. I think that helps me some with this. And if you think, if you believe in reincarnation, which I think is kind of like another necessary belief here, then like, what ultimately are we talking about with what we think of as suffering? I mean, I know this is kind of very controversial kind of stuff to say this, people always like go to the Holocaust and this kind of stuff. Well, we see people under stress and dying, but we don't know what's happening on the other end. So what we think is the most horrific experiences we might see that another human being is undergoing may in fact be their most blissful. There was somebody, a Zen teacher told me, one of his students who had almost drowned was rescued at the last moment. She said, if I could have bottled those last 3 minutes, I could have saved the world. I can't think this. Drowning is one of the scariest ways of dying I can think of, but and it looks like, you know, when you see people drowning and burning and all of these horrible things, it looks like the most horrible things are happening to us. How can the world be this way? It's just, how can anybody say the world's perfect? All these people are suffering, this and that. But if their actual experience on the other side of what we're seeing is bliss and oh, wait, look, we're still, oh my God, and it's blissful. That means something, doesn't it? I mean, is the world, are we really to judge just from our own waking experience in this one reincarnation how rotten the world is or isn't? You know, and again, I'm not, ultimately, the upshot of this belief system would be to feel more love for everybody, more connection with everybody. And out of that empathy, everything else would follow. Because I think without empathy, nothing is, no moral code is really, can hold up. And so I'm looking for what actually fosters empathy, what actually fosters a sense of union with people, and then take on the world, and then take on the challenges. But I agree with you. Mostly, like, I live your tension back and forth. I'm not, again, you know, Dave asked me to give this talk. I'm like, you know, I'm still working these ideas out. I don't, you know, I am definitely not ready to say I have the way. You know, I did have that when I had my mystical experience. I actually did have that, but my only understanding was whatever is. You know, two words, one repeated. You know, but it took me then 30 years, and I'm writing a book with, you know, 1,200 endnotes, you know, but basically the message is whatever is, you know. I'll get back to it. I'll leave my bookish ways, and, you know, but right now I'm with you, George, is what I want to say. I feel the tension you're feeling, I feel, and all of that. I'm just trying to make little escapes from it and try to look at it from a different angle, maybe. And you know, I just, you know, what I said about the Buddha was, he was a beggar who could fast. Nothing had to be different for him. Right? So anybody who thinks they're going to be the Buddha, it's like, well, and you got a 401k, you got an old Volkswagen, what do you got there? Because the Buddha didn't have anything. You know, he went out every day with his baking bowl, and if he didn't get any food, he could fast. And he slept on leaves and bragged about it. So if you got your sleeping bag or your futon, because you're not going to lose that. The Buddha lived, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Anybody else is faking it. And I don't want to be a faker.
I like that.
I'm sure we can continue on, but there was this understanding that we were going to end by about 12:30. I don't know. Are there any last questions from, you know, anybody that hasn't spoken or that has? You know, we're 3 minutes away from that 12:30 time.
Well, it's a great discussion. I mean, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And, you know, I hope we can continue it going, because I think that the, you know, we're individuals that are part of the whole. And I think the communication, it's like the points on the circle need to be in ultimately in connection with each other. So that's great. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.